Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the second part of the new revelations on my custom chess position, What's Your Decision? Um, so this video is kind of a continuation on opening theory that I've previously discussed, so I have a playlist of that. So please watch the previous videos first. But I'm going to go over something interesting. So a couple years ago in 2023, I made opening theory videos and on this position, and after this line f4 c5 f5, I concluded that this line d5 is eventually losing for black after many moves. And so basically with this video I was showing that this d5 move, while there's a lot of theory in it, none of it is really viable for black if both sides know the theory, because black will eventually be losing. However, upon going through the position in depth again in 2025, what I've figured out is that black is actually not lost in this position as was thought before. So this will make this d5 line very much playable. So I'm excited to show the new theory. So let's just go over, actually in this video I won't be able to go over why the position is lost, because why I thought it was lost after d5, because there are so many lines and each one was losing, which is why I recommend to go through the previous videos if you want to see that. But what I can show you is the new line that is not losing. So white wants to sacrifice on c3, but black plays d4, and after e3 the main move is knight c6, and that was the move that I went over 2 years ago, and which was eventually lost for black. However, I've recently discovered a move for black which is not lost, and that is the move 5 rook e8. And as I put in comments, this is the only move which does not lose for black. So I guess the main reason why knight c6 was losing eventually was that knight c6 blocks the knight and the bishop from developing, because this pawn on c6 cannot move. And so, and also the knight is very much needed to defend this d4 square, because white wants to take and sacrifice on d4 and then sacrifice their rook in order to free their queen and eventually their bishop as well. And so what was happening in these theory lines was that black was able to hold for several moves, but black really didn't have a plan, and white was slowly improving their pieces and bringing every piece into the center, and then they were eventually able to sacrifice and win. What rook e8 does is it develops the rook on this file, and it doesn't play knight c6, which means that black still can develop these pieces, and also what it does is it kind of stops the pawn to take on d4 right now, because this knight on e1 is undefended. So for example, white could try to brute force their way with e takes d4, and after e takes d4, black is going to take on e1. White can play bishop f2, then black takes another piece, and then white sacrifices on c3, and after c takes d4, bishop takes d4, c5. If black were to take on c3, then queen takes c3 is mate. After c5, white actually has, so these two pieces now, the bishop and the rook, are under attack, but white can play rook takes c5, b takes c5, c3, so they're just trying to open up the position. They're trying to open up the position against black's king, and also potentially win the c8 rook if after a couple of captures the rook would be hanging. So after, for example, bishop d7, which defends the rook, after bishop takes c5, rook takes c5, c takes b4, if the king were to take, then queen d4 check would be coming, and white's able to win the rook, which is why after, in this position, the best move for black is to take on d1. After rook takes d1, rook takes d1, bishop d6, bishop e3, bishop f8, so black is trying to maybe take on h6 and free their queen that way. White has bishop e4, knight b6 is played, queen c1, and you can see in this position, like we have a game. White freed their queen and bishop, but they are down a lot of material because they sacrificed. So black has 5, 8, 11, 14, 17 points of like piece material, and white has 9, 14, 17, 20, but they're also down several pawns. So it's an interesting position. And also, I don't know if this works here, but apparently it does. And bishop takes c5. Yeah, black has to be very careful about their king, but black could potentially free their queen in the future as well. And if black freed their queen in the future, black would probably just be winning because assuming black sacrifices less material than white. So that's why I have in my notes e takes d4 is slightly better for black, as white gives up too much material, although they do end up freeing their queen. So now we see that rook e8 doesn't immediately let white just take. We're going to go over the move. So g4 is a very flexible move by white, and it allows several different options for black, and there's several different ways the game can go. However, this move bishop f2 is the move bishop f2 is very is more constricting of black, and actually so after bishop f2 d takes a3 is a mistake. After rook takes, bishop takes, g takes f5, bishop h5, knight e6, knight f2, c6, and knight d1. White is going to win as they're going to sacrifice the knight and get their queen out. So normally a move like d takes e3 would not be a good idea. But after bishop f2, the only move for black then is knight c6. And this is going to transpose to our g4 line as the move for white is g4. So when I go over this g4 move, note that if white were to play bishop f2 first, then knight c6 would be the only option. But right now there are several options for black, including knight c6, g takes f5, and c6. Though if white only wants knight c6 to be a possibility, then they can play bishop f2 first. As now other moves such as g takes f5 and c6 wouldn't work after bishop f2 first, because after a move like c6, this bishop is defending the knight, so now e takes d4 is winning, because white will sacrifice and free the queen without sacrificing this knight and this knight over here, as happened if white were to play e takes d4 right away. So that's just a quick overview, because I made all the lines on g4, but I just wanted to show that. But I want to go into some of the so I guess I'll go into knight c6 first, because knight c6 might sound a bit counterintuitive, because I just explained in the opening how the reason why knight c6 was eventually lost was because it blocked these pieces, and then black and white eventually wins. So now what line I'm showing you is that after one move g4, black actually goes knight c6 anyways. So the question would be, why is white not winning in this line as opposed to in the other line? So if knight c6 was played immediately, we realize that e takes d4 can be played, and now because there's no rook on e8, then the rook cannot take on e1. So by including the move rook e8 first and then g4, now knight c6 works, because white has basically spent a move on playing this move, whereas before white hadn't spent an extra move. So if I were to go back to here, and now knight c6, you'll notice that, well, e takes d4 doesn't actually work, because after knight takes d4, if the bishop were to take, then this knight could be hanging as well. So for example, bishop takes d4, c takes d4, now the knight would have to move and would allow c5, because this knight is hit. And sorry, that's why rook takes c3 doesn't work, because the knight can take on f5 with check. And if I were to go back, the reason over here why knight takes d4 didn't work, um, yeah, over here white would be winning. But if I were to go back a few more moves, um, if I were to go to the rook e8 line, and after bishop f2, knight c6 takes, knight takes d4, and rook over here. Aha. The difference here is that bishop c6 is actually mate in this position. And if we were to go back to, again, back one more time to the knight c6 variation, after takes, takes, and takes, after check, yes, there is no bishop c6 mate, because first of all the king can go to the e file, though it wouldn't want to. It could probably just go to f2 because we have a bishop blocking f2 now. So it is a very tactical reason, I guess, then. Very tactical reason why knight c6 now works. So after g4, let's just go over this line first. g4, knight c6, this is the main line, because remember, after bishop f2, only knight c6 can be played, and then g4 is played right after anyway, so it's a transpositional line. So bishop f2, 6, and g4, and it's transposed. So, oh, okay, not here. Okay, g4, knight c6. So after g4, knight c6, white plays bishop f2, so now we've transposed into that same line, and black develops this rook, and knight g3, so white uses a square to develop that, and black is actually going to take on d3, because if black wasn't going to do that, they don't really have any good, like, they don't have any good developing moves, and the same problem with the other line is going to happen, that white is going to slowly bring their pieces in. But after d takes e3, and because white has played this rook e8 move already, then black trades these pieces, and then they go rook e8, to which point bishop f2 has to defend this knight on e1 again, and this allows knight d4. You will see that because white played g4, there's no knight takes f5. Also, the knight is now could be placed on g3. But what knight d4 is doing is it is allowing black to develop, and also this square is a very good square for the knight. So after knight d3, white is going to develop as well. c6 is played, and over here white is going to try to free their queen. Probably bishop f3 is also a move. Let's see after bishop f3. Yeah, I guess the problem with playing bishop f3 in the position is knight c7, and the knight is going to go to d5, which defends against any c3 sacrifices, and also prepares to sacrifice on f6, which is why in this position white acts fast, and they play knight takes b4. After knight takes b4, king takes b4. If they were to take with the pawn, then this knight is hanging, and then white will also take on c3 with the bishop. So king takes b4 is played, and the bishop develops to f3. Now, because the knight took on b4, the knight is no longer defending f4, so black uses this as an opportunity to develop the bishop with tempo on the rook, so black plays bishop takes f4. After bishop takes f4, rook e1 is played, and at this point there are two moves. So Well, there's only one move that holds, but the first move that looks probably best is, first of all, let's quickly check why rook takes e1 does not work for black. Oh, because the queen and the bishop are just gonna work against this. So the move bishop e5 though is actually losing for black, because after knight e4, which is a very good move for white because it's attacking the c3 square with two pieces and also defending against f6. Knight takes f3, g takes f3, so that opens up the bishop to defend c3, and now the bishop is also attacking f6. After knight c7 here, there are two moves. So the first move that I looked at was rook e3, and this move is not winning for white. After rook e3, knight d5 comes in, and after knight d5 is a very strong move for black because it's defending c3 and it's also attacking f6, and now black has enough pieces to break through. So white has to act quickly and play bishop e1, allowing them to have enough pieces to break through on c3, although this rook is hanging. But if black were to take on e3 with the knight, then while black is removing an attacker of the c3 square, they're also removing a defender. So white still has enough pieces to break through. For example, if takes over here, well, it's actually made in two because this is checkmate. So after bishop e1, black decides they're going to free their queen and they play bishop takes f6. Bishop takes f6. After bishop takes f6, white takes back, and here's the very interesting thing. So white has more attackers on c3 than black can defend it, and especially this bishop, and the king has nowhere to go. So what black actually has to do in this position is they're trying to free their queen, but they actually end up having to sacrifice their queen, because what this queen sacrifice does is when white goes to take back, they take on f6. Now the knight is moving away from the c3 square, and black is able to play rook takes e3, because once the knight takes, now the rook is also, it's not just knight takes e3, but rook takes e3. So after rook takes e3, black is able to take that. And then there are two moves. If white takes the knight on d5 with check and recaptures, white wants to, if white were to move the bishop away, then this rook is just, then d4 is played and white will never get the queen out, as well as black has a rook and two bishops over here, which they will use to beat white. So white has to take with the bishop, which makes the rook take back. And now the reason why white does that is because even if black were to play d4 and secure the rook, if black ever moved the rook, white could move this pawn and get the queen and bishop out. So essentially white is freezing the rook on c3. Now the king goes to g5, and after a few moves, for example a sample line, the rook takes over here. Now if a c3 is played, let's see what happens over here. D takes c3, rook takes h6 check, and actually the engine shows that black is slightly better even though white freed the queen, probably just because white's not really getting a promotion going and black could promote pieces as well, but it's a very complicated position. So after here the main engine lines go g5, white protects their pawn on h6, then after taking on h2, king g7, so the king goes for this bishop on g8, the rook goes to h1. Now if the bishop were to move, the rook can take the queen, but white wins a couple pawns over here. The bishop comes into e4 to take on c2 and to win the bishop. White plays king g7, bishop takes c2, and now because the queen is going to be lost anyways, because once the rook takes, the queen has nowhere to go, the queen sacrifices on d4 and white wins the bishop anyways. And you can see, according to the engine, this is a completely even endgame, but it's definitely anyone's chance to win, as both sides, white has maybe a stronger promotion effort, but black has a stronger piece. Black also still has pawns that can try to promote, and it's a very interesting endgame. That's just one of the sample lines in this position, because um, as you could see, many moves were playable in those positions, and we have also bishop takes c3 over here, with which the knight takes. And I actually think, based on the lines that I saw, this is maybe white's best chance. And there are several moves that can be played. This is a very complicated endgame now, and there are many moves. But let's say knight gets plays to e4. So in these variations, white is trying to free their queen. And if I just go through some of the lines, the king is going to come in, and after king takes f4, the engine is showing that white is slightly better, but it's tough to play for both sides. So this could be a move. Another move that white could play is f takes g6, and then they move the piece back, and you can see in this there's another similar endgame where white, maybe the engine likes white slightly better, but it's definitely playable for both sides. And I guess the other way that white can play this position is, instead of trying to go backwards, they can just win the bishop with their knight, and that allows rook e1 though, and now there's a threat to take the bishop. Knight f6, rook takes b1, queen takes b1, knight takes b1, knight takes h7, knight c3, knight f6, knight takes a2, knight e4, knight c3 for example, knight takes, king takes h7, king takes c2, and king b1. So now white already promoted, but black is threatening to bring their pawn forward. King g5, a2, h4, black promotes, white, they trade off, and white goes h5. And as you can see in this position, white's promotion efforts are faster, but black still has a bishop, which could help in the defense. And as you can see, this is anyone's game. So just a couple of another endgame could go to knight c3, knight takes, and again, and if in a position like this, if white were to just go h7 without playing knight c3, then after f takes e4 and the queen promotes, when the knight goes to c3 here, there's actually no way for white to get back to stop this pawn, and now black is going to be able to promote the pawn and have a knight and bishop extra, which is why black wins in a position like this. So just some very complicated lines. But if I were to go all the way back, these are complicated lines based on this move rook e3, and rook e3 is not the winning move. It is actually bishop g3 which wins. So yeah, in these terms of theory that I'm showing you, there's so many lines, because if you can remember, when I went all the way back, I said over here, yeah, bishop e5 is only knight c7 that is the move over here. But I'm showing you all the lines with bishop e5, which is losing, but there's just so much complications in any of these lines. So here bishop g3 wins, and it's actually, I wanted to show you this win because it was so fascinating. After bishop g3, bishop takes g3 and king takes g3. Now in this line, white is about to checkmate black, so black has to take. F takes e4, and now in this position, white is coming to e3, so the only way black can stop it is by playing knight e5. I guess bishop e2 and then knight b5 over here. Well, I guess the king can walk all the way over, but takes, king f4, and d4. So now if we look at this position, it looks like it's going to be a rook for white and a bishop for black, and it is that. But king e5, g takes f5, bishop c6, and or bishop c4 even. But after bishop c6, you notice there's just rook d1, and white is just breaking through, and now the queen's going to take. So it's completely winning for white, this position. And amazingly, the bishop can't really do anything because the bishop is constrained to the light squares, and these pawns are on the dark squares, so white is able to just walk into the position, take that pawn, and free the queen. So if we go back here, that's why bishop g3 is actually winning. And that is why bishop e5 is losing. So after rook e1, the only move black has is knight c7. So it's still very, very sharp, but these opening lines that I'm showing you, it's actually really interesting revelation because black is no longer losing. So So this becomes very playable, this after f5 to play d5, whereas before I thought it wasn't. So after knight c7, see, the engine's thinking white's winning, but we will see that that isn't the case. Oh, there, it's correcting itself. But after rook takes e8, knight takes e8, now the knight is threatening to take on f6. We have knight e4, and knight e4 is, again, a great move because it defends against that, and it also is looking to take over there. Which is interesting why bishop takes g3 check. Let's see. And after knight over here, oh, bishop e1, and now white is winning. So whereas if knight takes over here, why is bishop e1 not winning? Oh, bishop takes g5, king takes g5, queen f6 check, king f4, knight e6 check, king e4, queen d4 mate. Wow. See, even when I've prepared these lines and then I'm showing in the video, I still discover new things as I'm analyzing. So, knight takes e8, which then knight e4 has to be played. And after bishop d2, so bishop d2, interesting move, it just protects against c3. Knight takes d2 though, and that's going to free the queen. So black doesn't take back because there's just c3 check maybe, or bishop takes d4. So black is going to go in for their own queen freeing moves. So after knight takes f6, there's bishop e1. So now we have bishop e1 played because black's dark squared bishop is gone. Knight goes to e2, which defends c3 again. But the bishop will take it, and now once the bishop takes back and knight f3 is played, white is threatening to take on c3 again, but black has knight d5, which protects c3. However, white can go f6 again, so black just sacrifices on f6 to free their queen, and black just puts their pawn that was on f5, they just dump it onto f6. Which means, well, now if black were to take it, they completely lose because white's going to take on c3. But black, okay, first takes the bishop, first takes the knight, sorry, and after g takes f3, there's b5. And I have a note over here because if you look at the evaluation, the engine misevaluates the position and thinks white is winning. And I've written, we reach an equal endgame. Engine says white is winning because white can bring the bishop to f8 and then to g7, winning black's queen. However, this is actually losing as black. So, okay, so let me explain this to you. So let me just show a few lines. So king g3, and you'll note here that if black ever moves the king, bishop takes c3, frees the queen. So black can never move the king as long as the bishop is on e1. If the bishop moves, if the bishop were to move, for example, bishop g3, then after king a5, now if the bishop were to come back to e1 or to e5 attacking this pawn, then b4 comes here. But bishop d6, let's say b4 is played, bishop takes c5, king b6, king b5, and bishop takes a7, for example, is a line over here. And white is up one pawn, but the value of the pawns over here is not too much, as neither side has enough pawns to go for a promotion. And that's especially true as the queens and bishops are both trapped. So it's going to be kind of an even endgame where both sides bring their kings in and they try to get king activity. They try to have their king activity, and both sides will bring their kings and maybe try to win the opponent's pawns. And if they were to win all the pawns, then they could even win this pawn and free the queen. But in a position like this, the reason why the engine thinks that white is winning, because the engine thinks that bishop f8 is a move. However, for example, here, this is not a good move, even though the engine thinks so, because if you look at the position here, white's queen and bishop are never going to get free. And so even though white took black's queen, all that did was white had to sacrifice their bishop, which is free, for the queen, which is trapped, and now black is going to be able to get their other bishop up too. So now black has these two black has these basically two extra pieces, and white doesn't really have enough pawns to just push through for promotion, so black would actually win in a position like this. And that's why the engine thinks that white is winning in this endgame. Meanwhile, it actually is an equal endgame, or both sides have chances. And if we were to go back, you might think that the king can just walk all the way to d3, and then the bishop can take on c3. But whenever the king gets to d3, the knight is always going to go to f4 check. And in this particular position, it's very fascinating because white doesn't have a pawn to play g3 and guard that check. So black will always have knight f4 check, which will force the king to move away, and then the black knight will come back to d5, and so white can never use that plan. So king g3, for example. Yeah. So if white were to move the bishop away, then black can also move the knight. So for example, in this line that I just showed, bishop takes a7. Both sides would kind of just try to bring their kings out, and maybe opposition would be something that is important. Over here, black could probably play c5 though, and then try to take on f6. But after bishop b8, they have to be careful, because if they were to take on f6, then comes bishop e5. But yeah, in any case, that's an even endgame. So if we were to go all the way back, that's why knight c7 over here is the only holding move for black. And if we were to go back even further, even further, this is why rook e8 is actually a move which does not lose for black, and where I used to think that this f5 and then d5 line was winning for white. Actually, that's no longer the case. But now, as promised, I'll show you a couple more lines, because after g4, if you recall earlier in the video, I said bishop f2 forces knight c6, and then g4 is played. But if white were to play g4 first, now knight c6 is not forced, because white can never take on d4 yet, because the knight is still hanging, which allows several other moves for black, or a couple other moves at least. So the first is c6, and c6 allows the knight to go to c7 and then to d5, which is a good square. And these variations here are quite complex, so there isn't that many moves of definite theory, but I just show, for example, sample lines. The interesting move over here is that the engine thinks that knight g2 is the only move. Well, it thinks white has a significant advantage, but that's yet to be determined. So I guess knight g2 is played, then knight d5, e takes d4. So it gets very complicated. Bishop d6 is here. Knight e3. It's a very interesting. Knight g2 moves wants the knight to be traded off for this d5 knight, which is very strong. After g takes f5, knight takes f5, bishop f8, takes on c5, and see, even in this line, well, now the engine's thinking that black could be slightly better, but it's really a complex. It's a very complex move, complex sort of opening for variation for both sides. I actually think over here, because white has more chances to go after this c3 pawn, and I think that this, well, I guess this f6 pawn could be taken as well. Oh, the bishop d4. Again, that's a common tactic. So they'd have to take back first. And now, if knight e3, then now takes. Well, yeah, this line is better for black if white just allows the taking. So maybe in some line over here, so it looks like black is actually maybe could be better in this line. Yeah, it could be. I wonder why we don't have just take right away. Bishop takes c5. g5. and queen d6. Wow, and black is better. So if we go all the way back, potentially black is just better after after c6 over here. Which means that if that's the case, then white would have to play bishop f2 first, because again, after bishop f2 and then c6, this doesn't work because now white can take on d4. But let's just go back to another line. So after rook e8 and g4, let's look at the other line that I have, which is g takes f5. c6 gets played. This could transpose then. Knight c7 takes, knight d5, knight g3, and knight g3. I'm wondering why knight takes f6 doesn't just work over here. D takes c5, knight d5, knight takes b4. Wow. So that means this is kind of anyone's game. And if I were to go back and let's say that instead of let's say c6 is played over here, and let's say knight d3 is played over here, knight c7. Yeah, I guess we could, I'm trying to check the difference between these lines. Knight d5. Whereas knight d5 over here is before these pieces trade. So if I go knight c3, yeah, so it's similar lines. If I go bishop, they could play bishop takes over here, and then they could take with the knight or the bishop. They'll take with the knight over here. Then rook c2. So it's a very complicated game. And actually, my move with knight g2 in that c6 line might not be that great. As you can see, this line is kind of should be even for both sides, perhaps. Maybe that, or I'm wondering if they can take g takes f6. Though I think in a line like this, white is able to get in f6. Yeah, and now the bishop is still trapped. White's king is safe, and this could be winning for white. But yeah, so going back to g4, that means that c6, they seem to transpose. So c6 or g takes f5 kind of transpose, and that's another way that that black can play the position. But again, if and the lines are complicated, so don't have too much definite theory. But then again, if white wants to restrict black a bit, they can just play bishop f2, and now c6 or g takes f5 both run into taking on d4. So now knight c6 has to be played. We can go into those lines. But if I back all the way up, this essentially to this position, what the revelation today in this line is that actually d5 over here is playable. So after f5 is played, whereas over the past 2 years since I first came up with theory for the position, and I concluded that d5 is not actually playable for black. Today I've revised my position on that, and based on the new theory I've showed you, d5 is very much playable. D5 is very much playable, and based on the last video I showed you, I still think g takes f5 is playable, but it's a little bit more difficult for black based on the new theory I found there. And of course, I'm not going over it in this video, but after f5, c6, nothing has changed in that theory. That's still a viable option for facing f5. So if anything, there's more options that each side has with these updated theory. Anyways, I hope that you enjoyed this video, and that's it until I figure out some new things to show you in this position.